Hello everyone, and welcome to this look into Mari 5. I'm going to touch on some example workflows that you can achieve with our new brush engine, and then walk you through our new USD pipeline workflows. Artists working in Mari 5 can experience an unprecedented level of precision and creative control thanks to our newly introduced dynamic color controls to the brush engine. Artists are able to adjust the color effect for each splatter of their chosen brush tip as you paint a stroke across the canvas. Meanwhile, the much requested Hue Saturation Value Brush Jittering feature has been added, with the ability to precisely adjust the range of each of these effects together or in isolation. Each new jittering effect can be configured to either change color on a per tip or per stroke event, allowing artists to create more stylistic brushstrokes than has ever been possible before. Mari 5's enhanced brush engine also includes improvements to generating file-driven brush tips. Artists can now specify whether a brush tip's alpha is generated from an image's red, green, blue, alpha, or luminance channels, or the ability to utilize the full RGBA color data from an image file, including color space controls, which enable artists to splat decal images as their brush tips. I'd like to show you a couple of practical examples of how you can harness the power of our new brush engine. Here is a full color brush image of a green leaf. I can turn on hue jittering per tip, and by default it is shifting the green hue of the leaf 720 degrees towards reds and blues at the same time. I can first drop this down towards the reds only, but at -1 is still jittering across 360 degrees of hue, so I restrict this range to just as -0.2, and my brushstrokes now deliver me scattered leaves of all the autumn colors. I can also enable pen pressure, which allows me to control the hue based on how hard I press my pen down. We'd love to see what artists can come up with using this new style of decal painting. Here is an example of using the color jittering between your foreground and background color to create a stylistic cartoon blue eye. Traditionally, you could jump between your two colors with opacity to get a mix between them. With the precise range controls, I can have each splat jitter just 25% towards the background color. As you can see, I can get more than just a straight blend between these two colors now. I can get more blue hues as I paint. I can switch between the foreground and background colors with the X key as I did before, allowing me to build up darker and brighter hues across the iris, getting me a pretty great result. Finally, here is an example of painting stylized skin for an animated character. I first pop out a floating image color picker tab and drag my color managed reference imagery to it to be able to quickly pick colors as I paint. Secondly, I have my brush settings configured to ever so slightly jitter the hue and saturation of brush color on a per stroke basis. And now I can easily pick and paint the skin with each brushstroke, shifting its color slightly. With more and more non-photoreal animation projects being produced, I'd love to see what art-directed characters artists can achieve with Mari 5. Now I'd like to walk you through the new USD workflows in Mari. Open source by Pixar, USD, or the Universal Scene Description, is an interchange format that allows you to layer many 3D elements like characters, environments, cameras, lighting, and effects simulations into a composited scene called the stage. Mari makes use of this format to create a project from USD files describing models, and then transport the textured look for the model to other digital content creators like Katana. Let's first look at the USD model import dialog. This portion of our USD workflows was originally prototyped by Pixar. Its UI has been limited by Mari's custom geometry plugin framework, so it is not as user-friendly when compared to the built-in Alembic and FBX plugins. However, we've extended the plugin framework in Mari 5, and as Foundry has taken over development of the USD plugins, we intend to develop the UI into a more intuitive experience in future. So let's have a look at some of the options you'll need to get your USD model into Mari. I want to import a USD version of Gaël's dragon asset. I'm going to use the USD View standalone application to better illustrate the contents of this USD file. You can see the model's hierarchy is made up of various mesh and XForm locations. If I use Katana to inspect the UVs of this model, you can see that the body, tongue, and teeth have their UVs laid out in UDIMs, but the eyes and corneas are UV'd in the first UV patch. This means I'm going to want to bring this model in as two objects, one for the meshes with the UVs and UDIMs, and one for the eyes. Let's start with the meshes that have UDIMs. The first import setting in the UI is Load, which contains 3 modes. The mode First Found will only load the first mesh found in the USD stage, which won't help us here. Going with the second mode, or Models, is usually the more useful setting to use. However, as we only want the specific body meshes with UDIMs, I'm going to use the specified models in model names mode. For merge type, I want all the meshes merged as a single Mari object, so I'll choose merge models instead of keep models separate, which would make a Mari object for each USD mesh. For the model name setting, I need to enter all the mesh locations. I can get these from USD View. If I select all the meshes I want to import, their absolute paths get displayed at the top of the interface in a text box. Now unfortunately the Mari importer doesn't yet support spaces in the model name setting, so for now you'll need to manually remove these spaces after each comma. But once that's done, a simple copy-paste will get these mesh locations into Mari's import UI. The UV set and mapping scheme work together to determine which available UV set in the model should be used for painting within Mari. If the USD file has multiple UV set names across the meshes, they'll be listed here. The mapping scheme defines whether or not to create Mari objects with UVs or PTEX. If you have a mix of objects with UVs and without, the default option will only create PTEX objects for the meshes without UVs. The rest of these options I'll leave as default, as I don't have animation to import or any model variants. With the project created, you can see I now have the specified meshes merged as one model. I just need the eyes imported as a second object. So going to the Add Object button in the Objects palette, I can rinse and repeat the previous steps, but specifying the eye meshes in the import window. And there you have it, a USD model in Mari ready for painting. Let's jump ahead to my finished painted dragon and look at the new USD Preview Look authoring workflow. The dragon was textured against the Arnold standard surface shader and has channels and breakpoints ready to export high-resolution maps for final rendering in Arnold. But I also want to author a preview look for this dragon to be used in hydro-powered viewports in digital content creators like Katana. So alongside the Arnold shader, I'm going to create a USD Preview surface shader which now ships with Mari 5. I connect the same channels and breakpoints to the relevant inputs of the USD Preview surface shader for both body and eye objects. In the scenario where your production renderer shader doesn't have channels that match the preview surface shader, you have the opportunity to blend your various channels together and make a composited preview only channel. Once you have your preview shaders plumbed into your channels, you can export this look to a USD shade document using the new Export Manager USD Export tab. Once you've switched over to the USD Export tab, the first thing to do is ensure your objects are going to convert the correct shaders you made into USD materials. You can do this by editing the table at the top of the window. In the center of the window is the breakdown of each shader and the channels or breakpoints connected to its inputs. The columns specify the target with size, color space, bit depth, and image format overrides. These can be fine-tuned to your project needs on a per-input basis. At the bottom are the exporting options used to define the main parameters of the Preview Look file you want to author. To start, set your texture target directory, as this will act as the root path for all your exported texture and USD files. All other file parameters in this window will be set as relative to this root path. Next, define a global texture file name template using replaceable $token words. This parameter can be used to configure the file format of all the export targets. However, if you need to mix and match, you can override individual export target file formats in the center table. The USD Look File parameter specifies the USD shade document name that will be created, containing the materials, shaders, texture nodes, and material assignments. The root name needs to match the root name of your original model USD file. So if I pop over to USD View, I can copy and paste the path into Mari. With the UV set name, leave it as is. ST is the standard name for UV sets when working with USD. But some digital content creators that allow you to export models to the USD format may have their UV set names defaulted to map1 or something similar. If this field is changed or left empty, your UV set name will not be correct and your textures will not map properly. By default, Mari will just export the look as a standalone shading network. This could then be used as a common look element that is referenced by many other model payloads. However, if you just want a USD file with the look coupled with the model you created the project with, then you need to configure the export window to create an assembly USD file with the model payload. To create the assembly, you'll need to specify both the target USD file name as well as the source model payload USD file. The payload will usually be the same model file that you used to create the project with. Once assigned, the assembly file will reference this model payload and composite the exported look file on top of it to get the resulting USD file with your shaded model. With the USD export parameters now all configured to your liking, you can review the individual export settings for each of your preview shaders inputs and fine-tune where necessary. As I am exporting to an 8-bit PNG, and my project is using an ACES color config, I'll quickly retarget each input to either utility sRGB texture or utility raw, depending if the shader input uses color or scalar data respectively. There are also temporary override options available, like in the main export manager window, which I can use to quickly override bit depth or resolution. And after all that, we can now export the textures and have Mari author our USD files. With everything exported, I can now test the new look in USD View. Once loaded, I can now see my preview shaders looking great in the viewport. I'm just going to hide the cornea meshes so that you can see the textured eye behind it. If you look at the scene hierarchy, you can see all the material and shader locations that have been added to create the preview look in USD. Here is the file again, but seen in Katana's hydra viewport. Authoring preview looks in Mari 5 is just the beginning of our USD journey, as we are currently designing far more extensive workflows for your look development pipelines. For some assets, like props and environments, signing off as look development with Mari's approximation shaders is sometimes all that is required for the show. So when the texture maps exported from Mari are sent to a shading artist, all they would do is plug the maps directly into the relative BXDF shader and assign it to the same model file the Mari artist had originally created their project with. With the introduction of the USD Shade standard, this step of the shading process can be completely automated and performed at export time within Mari. Next year and beyond, we are planning to extend our USD Look exporter to support vendor shader contexts alongside the preview surface, so that a complete and final USD material can be generated from within the Mari project. We also want to enable artists to use Mari selection group tools to drive submesh location and facet-based material assignments, with the vision that all your look development of flattened texture-driven shading networks can be completely authored within Mari. And that's the look into Mari 5's paint and USD workflows. Try Mari 5 today at Foundry.com. Thanks for watching and happy painting!
Hi everyone, and a big thanks to the Mari team for inviting me to this Mari 5 webinar. I'm Gaël Kerchenbaumın, and I'm currently working as a creature specialist at Facebook AI. I've been using Mari for 8 years now on various projects, mainly focusing on creatures, modeling, and texturing. Today I'm going to speak to you about this dragon I did for Mari 5. I'm going to speak to you about my organic approach of surfacing, my smart material approach of surfacing, and some of the Mari 5 features I'm super excited about. Let's start with the breakdown of the dragon. Okay, let's speak about the texturing I did for this dragon. So the first map that was super useful, and this is a map that I'm always using, so this is why I call it a one map to rule them all, is a displacement map. So using the displacement map, what you want to achieve is to be able to separate it or to customize it the way you want, so you can really isolate the various pieces of your model. Some other maps that were super useful were isolator. So these guide maps are basically super easy to achieve. So what you want to do is you just want to paint some black and white information that will correspond to the various areas of your model. You split all of these maps into their own channels, into their own nodes, so you can edit them later on during your organic approach of texturing. As a sculptor, something that I always found super important for my texturing is to reproduce my sculptor mindset. Which means that whenever I'm working on an asset, I want to work from the primary volume to the secondary volume and then conclude with the tertiary volumes. In order to do that, I'm trying to again separate my texturing into various areas using the isolator, but then later on use some procedural nodes that Mari gave me access to, like clouds, for example. Then the displacement is really coming into play. The customized displacement is really coming into play. Using the customized displacement, what you can do, for example, is to isolate all the cavities of your model and say that you will want to have, for example, some dirt coming directly inside of the cavities of your sculpt. and you will be able to use a cloud and populate this inside of the cavities with the procedural nodes coming inside of Mari. Then something that was super important was to age the texturing of the scale, or to make it look more natural. So once you texture the primary and secondary colors of your model, something that you will see is that your model will look really flat, and you need to add a new model information to your model. You want to add the age information. You want to make it look more lively. Again, the displacement being split into various isolator maps. What I was able to do was to use some adjustment nodes inside of Mari and say that, for example, I wanted to have the edges or the border of the scale to look more milky, to look more whitey, and to look less saturated, as if wear and tears were coming into play. You can also finally emphasize everything that is coming on your model using, again, this same displacement, this map to rule it all. You can emphasize things that are happening. You can do a global adjustment on your texturing, which is something that I did also on the Dragon. I wanted the scales to be more visible, so I used my isolator for the scales and some HSV or brightness lookup nodes inside of Mari, and I added more contrast to this region. Every time when I'm working on an asset, I'm trying to have this same and consistent artistic approach. So I'm working from the primary to the secondary and then the tertiary. Having this really consistent approach of texturing helped me to create my meta material. So this same material, this smart material that I will be using on all my different assets, on some region of my different assets, and that I will combine with one another. This is something that I did for the Dragon as well. I used the texturing that I did previously for one of my personal projects on a Sphinx cat. This Sphinx cat was pure skin, and I wanted to use this material of skin and to populate the region that were looking similar on my Dragon. So for this reason, this skin material was used on the gum region and the tongue region of my Dragon. Again, try to be super consistent when you are working on surfacing, and also try to keep everything really understandable and non-destructive. Once you will see that everything is non-destructive, what you can do is you can use your previous texturing, and you can use that to convert your texturing into a material. That's a feature that is super powerful inside of Mari. With this material, you can texture an asset in a matter of hours rather than in a matter of days. This material can also be something that you want to use into your production. If you have access to a skin material, or if you have access to plastic material, then you can use this plastic material in order to texture super quickly and automatically an asset that you took time to sculpt. Nuke has previously been my tool of choice when I wanted to convert my displacement into various utilities. So this workflow needed me to be able to go back and forth between ZBrush, between Nuke, and between Mari in order to be able to have access to my new customized utility map, or my new isolator. So this was a really efficient approach that I had access to in the past, and this helped me also to create a lot of different information. So as I said before in this video, I was able to use my displacement and customize it, so I could isolate all of the small details coming from the sculpt in order to texture them differently or separately from the rest of the albedo of my Dragon. With Mari 5, we now have access to a super exciting feature, at least a super exciting feature for me. This feature is the breakpoint filters. With the new breakpoint filters, what you will be able to do is to remove the usage of Nuke, and you will be able to do directly your texturing inside of Mari without the need of going and using another 3D package. These breakpoint filters are also editable. As before, what you want to do is to make sure that everything stays editable for a more procedural and editable approach. You don't want to have a destructive approach of your texturing. This is exactly what these breakpoint filters will help you to achieve. So I'm really excited by this new feature, and I'm really looking forward to use it for my next texturings. Now, I'd like to emphasize the fact that Mari 5 and Mari in general has been a tool for production, but also for artists. Mari offers a great compromise between technicity, artistry, and efficiency. So once you really understand your tool, you will be capable of doing your texturing from one asset and never had to reproduce it again. Then you will be able to convert this into a meta material. And with this meta material, you will be able to texture all your upcoming assets without the need of redoing it from scratch every time. So let Mari work for you and try to understand how Mari works. You will see that the new tool also provides better efficiency and less dependency on other packages, which is exactly what we want. We want to be able to texture our asset within one package only, without the need of having to do back and forths between a lot of different softwares.
Welcome to Meshmen Studio. In today's episode, we're gonna take a look at time, coffee, and why nodes don't lie. There's also gonna be a boxing match between Mari versus Mari. Let's get into it now. Let's begin with why nodes doesn't lie and why I prefer node-based workflow over layers. Okay, so here in Mari 5 I have imported a walking teapot from Pixar. It's in USD format as Mari 5 just got this new USD feature introduced. And I guess for studios in particular, USD is the future and will save us a lot of time as we now more and more frequently get USD natively in the pipeline. So here I'm adding open subdiv smoothing to the geometry, and then I'm adding some metallic materials here to the object. I'm using the Renneman shader here for Mari. All my materials is building on physical properties, and here I'm tweaking the look of the material. And then I'm adding a non-metallic material here and tweaking the actual look of this material. I'm reusing the same material twice here to make like a flame on top of this teapot. I mean, who doesn't want flames on their teapot, right? And I'm using a stencil to add this. I have to paint out some unwanted areas, and then I'm gonna focus on adding some breakup onto this asset after I've covered all of the areas that I want. So I'm using then a breakup mask that I created earlier using my geochannels. And this procedural mask is something that you can create and reuse in your pipeline. So that's really nice, and I can package it and just drag it from my shelf. And next up, I'm now gonna add some dirt here. So I'm first dragging my dirt shader on top, and then I'm gonna mask this in using the same technique as for the edge breakup mask that I created earlier. And I obviously need to tweak this a bit, so I'm doing a pass of hand painting, removing some dirt here and there, and maybe adding some dirt as well. You can also utilize additional procedural techniques if you like that. So yeah, it's up to you, really. And now here, we're gonna do some additional, I'm just adding some dirt here onto the feet and stuff like that. And yeah, so here's kind of the result after 15 minutes or so. Now let's take a look here under the hood and see what we have created actually. What the f just happened? So layers is great to get you up and running quickly, but it's also very hard to maintain complex assets using layers. So as you can see here from the underlying node graph here that was created, it's a lot of things happening here, and we might end up having a hard time to maintain scenes that become too slow, for example. And this in turn consumes one of the most precious resources we have in VFX, and that is time. So by using nodes, it's easier to maintain complexity, even the most complex scenes with hundreds up to thousands of UDIMs. Using nodes, we are in full control, and you know what? Nodes don't lie. In visual effects, it's quite common that we pop over to the kitchen while we wait for a lengthy process. I like coffee, so it's nothing wrong with that. To save some time, we can use the node graph in Mari. That opens up a whole slew of new possibilities and workflows. So yeah, let's take a look at how we can do that. So as you can see here, when I'm using the node graph, I have sections for different materials here. And I'm using a specialty node called a Breakpoint to section off heavy parts of the node graph. And it's also a lot easier to share portions of my asset and reuse. And this in itself also saves time and resources in the end. Another quite overlooked time saver, studios for example, often use the Mari API. We can basically add our own workflows or even add to existing tools if we need to. So this in turn means while the texture artists pop over for a quick coffee, Mari also publishes the texture straight from within the software to the pipeline. But that's not all. Even independent artists can benefit from developments in the form of the oh so popular Mari extension pack, where we have a ton of time-saving add-on and tools. And I highly recommend using the Mari extension pack with Mari. Let's have a boxing match in Mari. In the blue corner we have Mari 4.7 and in the red corner we have the contender Mari 5. And let's get ready to rumble! So Mari 5 comes with faster baking speed. And this feature was developed in collaboration with Weta. So I took this old asset here and duplicated a bunch of times. And looking at the UV view here, it contains 552 UDIM tiles. And that's quite a lot actually. So I'm going to bake down a cloud noise here using a Breakpoint set to 4K in 16-bit. Participants, get ready to rumble in 2 rounds. Round 1, fight! In the blue corner, Mari 4 is chugging along. But here, look at the mic in the red corner. It looks like the rookie is going for a knockout. Mari 5 wins! That was too easy. Mari 5 isn't even sweating yet. Let's go for the heavyweight championship next. And that's 1104 UDIMs to be exact. Let's get ready to rumble! Round 2, fight! As in previous round, Mari 5 seems to take the lead here. Mari 4 is actually looking quite desperate. Is it the blows from the previous matches taking out his toll now? And as we can see here, Mari 5 is just dancing around Mari 4 in the ring. He's not even breaking a sweat. KO! Mari 5 wins! Mari 5 is the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world! Let's have a look at another time-saving feature that was introduced in Mari 5, and it's actually in one of my old feature requests, and it's the Breakpoint filter. Prior to the Breakpoint filters, I had to post-process my procedural workflows in Nuke or do a destructive operation using the lay methods. And now with Mari 5, we can now benefit from the flexibility of the Breakpoint direct in the node graph, and we can apply the filters using this one. So this will save both export and import time and will also make us consume less coffee in the process, right? And this is how you do it. So I'm back here using the teapot again, and we have some paint here that I want to apply and tweak a non-destructive filter on. So after my paint node here, I'm inserting a Breakpoint and bake it out. Next up, I'm tweaking here the filter settings to be able to, for example, blur the effect here. So take a look here now what happens if I paint something upstream of this Breakpoint. So as you can see here, the Breakpoint becomes dirty, and that means it's out of date. and we can just rebake it, and the filter that we previously added is then reapplied with the same settings. And voila, we're in action. And this one will save a lot of time, for me at least. Isn't it cute? Mari 4.7! Never give up, never surrender! That's the spirit!